Sector Digital Leaders webinars. As you may know, School for Social Entrepreneurs and ourselves at Zoe Amar Digital are currently working with DCMS and the Office of Civil Society on a programme to help more charity and social enterprise leaders get skilled up in digital right across the UK. We're running 5 of the programmes concurrently across the UK at the moment. And today, for the very first of our webinars, which we are delighted to be running with Jim Bowes, who's CEO of Manifesto, we're going to be talking about organisational change. So can I start firstly by welcoming Jim? Jim's got a hectic schedule and bless him, just got off a transatlantic flight yesterday, and it's remarkably well for someone who's obviously quite jet lagged and is such a busy man. Jim, I'm delighted to welcome you. I'm very happy to be talking to you about organisational change. I know that you work with a lot of charities, obviously, in what you do. Do you want to say a little bit more about what you do before we get started?
Yeah, absolutely. So I run Manifesto, which is an agency that I founded 7 years ago. We're a digital experience and platform business. So we help people understand their audiences, and we help that then build out the platforms, tools, and organisational change to help sort of realise the opportunity that the digital presents. Before that, I ran the web development team at Cancer Research and worked in a variety of organisations. So originally, sort of in my earlier digital career, worked on sort of services for London, working on online school admissions across London for the first time it was ever done, and all projects, everything from reporting broken street lamps to a parks database for London. So worked in that sort of design of digital services really for the last 20 years or so. And the Manifesto is now part of a slightly bigger group of companies that sort of go into the sort of different areas than we do. So the projects I've always really avoided, like CRM projects, because I think they're always a total nightmare, that's now covered in our sort of wider group. And I guess then the other thing about me is I present a podcast called Alexa Stop, which is about how technology is changing people's lives.
Brilliant, great. And during that time, you must have seen so much organisational change, and obviously working in lots of different organisations there as well. So I know that you're going to start this webinar by sharing some of, I think, the 3 things which you've learned about organisational change. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I suppose just sort of 3 things that I think are incredibly important. One of them is taking time to understand where you are today. So that's a really sort of simple thing today to say, but understanding what your current position is, and there's some tools that you can do to really do that. One of them is sort of getting staff to do staff survey about their skills and looking at the gaps in those. One of the ways that's a really sort of good consultancy tool that you can use is to do some sort of maturity model where you sort of make an assessment of where you currently are and where you want to be. But however you do it, I think that sort of first tip is get a really consolidated view of where you're currently at and what challenges that's causing for your business or for your organisation, particularly if you're a charity or social organisation. And then some of the other things that I think are incredibly important are sort of cultural, really. So I think perhaps to sum it up in one word, transparency is probably what I would say is absolutely critical. So you can get into a situation inside organizations where people are building their own little worlds, or they've got their own sort of like hidden agendas. And probably one of the things that I can say that's hugely different about working in an agency environment compared to when I worked in the charity sector is that there's virtually no organizational politics inside an agency, because we're always so focused on trying to do what we're trying to do for our customers that none of that sort of little world building sort of starts to occur. So finding ways that you can have really open, honest conversations and build safety for difficult conversations, I think is the most important and probably one of the biggest barriers to creating meaningful change. And it's the reason that it sort of pervades is because it's hard, and because there's lots of amazing, lovely people that often work in these organizations that perhaps just don't want to have difficult conversations. But until you can create an environment that's safe to have difficult conversations in, it is quite difficult to sort of meaningfully sort of move forward. And then thirdly, I suppose, it's sum it up. So I think a vision is incredibly important, and you've got to have a vision that you build consensus around. But a vision is sort of useless if there's no joy. And we've been working recently with some places where actually it's just not fun to work at those places. And if you're going to get to that next level of achieving things, and being more transparent with each other, and assessing where you're at and having honest conversations about where you want to get to, actually there needs to be some joy in the workplace and excitement and fun. And I think it's one of the things that the charity sector feels the guiltiest about, because they feel guilty about spending some money on a nice collaboration space, or taking the team out for a great lunch. And I sort of sometimes feel terrible for all of the tools that I have at my disposal as a business in Manifesto to just, I take a member of my team for breakfast every Wednesday so that we can just catch up and we know what each of us are working on. That spending quality time together as a group and having the right environment to work in, and just some fun and excitement actually leads to so many of the other changes.
Brilliant, thank you. That's such a great summary, and I think that this is some very powerful points about how you name and how you find the space to talk about the elephant in the room, and how that's a lot less scary once you do that. And then obviously your point about how change is painful, but at the same time it can be invigorating and can be fun. So I think there's that nice Richard Branson quote, isn't there? You don't have to be having fun to have fun, which I think those of us who work in digital will really relate to. So thank you, that's a really helpful summary. Before we get into some questions from the participants, I've got a few questions that I'd like to ask you, if that's okay.
I'd love it.
So can we start with, why is organisational change so important for digital success?
Yeah, so I suppose the world is changing. As the world changes around us, it's important that organisations become good at adapting themselves to the challenges that they face. So this isn't specifically about digital, not in my mind. Really, digital transformation has become a synonym just for organisational transformation. And if we look at the charity sector, some of the factors that are causing the change are absolutely nothing to do with digital. Some of them are, individual giving is in really substantial decline, and as individual giving declines and people are less likely to sign up to direct debits, there's a necessity for organisations to innovate and think in different ways. And the digital and technology space, I suppose, has some ways of working that deliver rapid innovation and that we can all learn from. But I think we have to be clear that this is definitely not about a new website. This is about the cultural elements, the ways of working, the skills that, the goal for every organization in a way is that the digital capability is fully distributed within the organization, and there is no need for a big digital team or specialist digital stuff going on, that it becomes a native capability, and those ways of working are completely embedded to the point that it's just more natural.
So you think people should think change first, then digital? Is that the order that it should go in? So start with the organisational change and then to think about the digital can almost like that. Is that how you would look at it?
So I suppose I would say I'd start with the needs of your varied stakeholder groups. So what organisationally, who's your organisation trying to support and help, and do you really understand that audience? And then who are your enablers to allow you to do the work that you do, and do you really understand that audience? And if you can map the needs of your audiences to the goals of your organisation, and then recognize a load of things that you need to be able to achieve in order to realize that connection. And then you can map that and say, how do we as an organization currently support achieving those things? and you can have an honest conversation about where actually the structure of the organization doesn't make sense for what you're trying to achieve, then that for me is the right way around. So it's sort of what are we trying to achieve, and is that audience centered? And then in what way are we currently mismatched? And some of that's to do with things like short-termism, right? So why is a fundraising team not good at collaborating with another team in the organization? Or maybe they've got incredibly short-term, short-sighted financial goals that mean that they are entirely centered on something that's actually not terrifically strategic for the organization. And so some of this is about addressing the actual KPIs that whole organizations sign up to.
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking about how you're going to measure and track that change, it sounds like, as you were saying earlier, having a very, very clear vision of where you're going to get to as well. So speaking of that, what do you think are the critical success factors in digital transformation? I mean, you and I will have seen many projects over the years where things haven't worked out in the way that people will have wanted, or they've hit a real roadblock. And what do you think are the real critical success factors in a project like this?
So I think many things. Persistence is one of them, and perhaps persistence and consistency, and an acceptance that there's an element of 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. You're going to have to, get your energy and excitement for this, and then be able to go again. And I think then it's important that organizations don't hire whole teams of contractors, which may be a controversial thing to say, and don't entirely staff with agencies. Like, I think the role of agencies and contractors to help you accelerate a change, it can be really important, but you've got to make sure that brief is about bringing greater capability into your organization, or carefully choosing the things which can be entirely outsourced but aren't absolutely core to delivering your strategy. So it's about working out where you need to build capability in your organization. And so for example, we've done some projects where an organization has been like, we're running this whole digital transformation ourselves, and then you get there and it's entirely staffed by contractors. So we as an agency are working into contractors. We're helping train loads of people how to do better agile product delivery and all kinds of things. And all of those people leave that organization with loads of great expertise that we've handed on to them, and we've helped them become much better contractors. On the other side, the organization isn't necessarily left much better skilled itself. Whereas what we've done with another organization we're currently working with, we've paired members of our team with the leaders of 4 work streams in their transformation. So they have a sort of peer or mentor relationship for each work stream, which hopefully will leave behind a meaningful legacy of people that have learned new ways of working or new skills on that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking about the legacy of the project and how you build that capacity is so important, isn't it? And a really overlooked part of digital transformation in my experience, actually. So speaking of that, who do you think are the key people to get on side in this kind of project? And what can you do to manage them if they are resistant to change?
Yeah, I mean, I remember a long time ago when I was at Cancer Research, it took me 3 weeks to convince someone to move desks. And so, and I always sort of think about that as a sort of microcosm of resistance to change, because I ended up working on this team member for 3 weeks to just sort of, but because they've been sat in the same desk for 8 years, I think.
Attached. Yes, yeah, I see that, I get that.
And so I think you have to sort of go, you have to dig into the issue, because something that seems, if you're someone that works on transformation projects, or, Manifesto works with about 30-ish different customers. So what desk I'm sitting at on a given day is not high on my priority list, because I'm used to having a quite unstable environment. And I create my own stability, by choosing to eat a sandwich I like from Pret or something. My sort of consistency comes in a different way. But if someone has had a world or if someone is articulating resistance to something, they're doing it for a reason. And I think you have to dig under the challenge. So first of all, you can't belittle anyone's reason for being resistant, because for them it's real, however insignificant it seems to us with our point of view. And then you've got to understand it. And I think there is an element of, in the early days of a transformation, picking which bits of an activity or which bits of an outcome and who you want to involve in something. Because for some people, showing consistency or showing some success with a team of people that are really keen can be part of the process for unlocking the sort of future change. And I think sometimes that comes back to that transparency point as well, where actually just sharing with people the realities, the context, the fears. We use a technique called lightning talks when we run design sprints with people, which are just 10-minute talks where someone talks about a topic and basically throws out a whole series of sort of context or facts about anything they want. And when we start a design sprint, we'll normally do sort of 5 of those on the first day. And then people who are watching make notes in the form, how might we? So you might be doing a lightning talk about how hard you're finding it to recruit people inside your charity. And as you talk about all the challenges that you face with recruitment or retention, the whole room is going, how might we make flexible working more effective so we can attract different people? And then that gives you a jumping off point to build sort of effective strategies.
Oh, that's such a good idea. I love that how might we technique, because it immediately gets people a bit more comfortable with thinking differently, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's sort of aspirational, so yeah.
Yeah. So on that note, actually, can you name some examples of organisations, ideally charities, that if not interested to hear more widely, who you think have really nailed this, who've really gone through this whole process of organisational change, really embraced digital, and who've got to the point where you would look at them and go, wow, hats off, that's the case, you have to do this brilliantly. Who comes to the top of your mind on that subject?
So I suppose there are some examples of like quite digitally native organizations. So I think there's sort of examples of people that have been conceived in a modern era, and then there's who maybe haven't needed to transform. People that jump to mind, people like Charity Water. There's a startup that we worked with called We Farm that were entirely sort of digitally conceived. And then I think you've got traditional organizations that have done a good job of working their way along a journey. So, and I think a lot of, if I were to characterize on the fly 3 stages, you've perhaps got, oh my God, we need to do something about this whole digital thing. There's sort of, we've kind of got this digital thing going, but it's all operating from a central function, and the wider organization just really hasn't got its head around it. We've kind of moved to some sort of hub and spoke kind of a model. And then there's digital is fully embedded throughout the organization, and our head of digital had an opportunity to go on a round the world trip because we don't need him anymore. And I think in that sort of gamut, one of the people we've worked with is UNICEF UK, who have executed the hub and spoke part of that really well. So I'm not sure it was fully at the fully embedded stage throughout the organization, but it's certainly distributed. And they have a relatively small core team of specialists, and then we work with them to do things like create a content strategy that would make it easy for people across the whole organization to produce content. It has a visual sort of pyramid that relates, you basically pour an idea into the top of a funnel, and it relates it to your brand, your tone of voice. It moves it into, is it the Hero Hub hygiene content model, which YouTube popularized? And then there are 7 content categories that relate back to the user personas, the audience personas. And basically, what it means is anyone can pour an idea in, and if it doesn't land somewhere in this diagram, it's not an appropriate idea, but it's all articulated on a single page. And so it's what practical tools can you create that enable your organization? to speak about someone else, I know that Cancer Research have been doing a good job of embedding digital people directly within other teams in the organisation.
Yeah.
And so, you know, people from the digital team fully embedded in fundraising, and with the sort of goal of that being temporary until it's not needed anymore. And then perhaps more closely from my personal experience, and even speaking about someone that's not a customer, I'm a trustee at ASMA UK, who are have won an award for their digital leadership and progress. And it's by no means easy, but what they have really done is, you know, the digital function as was doesn't exist anymore, and now it's about digital health, it's about advice, it's about innovation labs and partnerships, and they've really started to sort of drive digital out through the organization, and I think it's caused huge challenges. So I'm a trustee that they started by getting 2 inverted commas digital trustees, of which I'm one. And that, I think even that's a pre-stage, right? Because part of my role there is to help the rest of the trustees be more digital. And we have a virtual digital subcommittee, but that has a mixed membership. So the 2 digital trustees are on it, but also 3 or 4 others that are from, you know, accountancy backgrounds and legal backgrounds, the sort of classic trustee backgrounds. And so I think over time, they're all gaining in confidence to talk on matters that relate to digital, and I'm getting greater confidence to talk on matters that relate to finance and audit, which I never thought would happen. And so, you know, I'm learning stuff too there, and it sort of then sort of goes through the organisation, and that sort of, they become genuinely a digital organisation. However, I'm also the chair of remuneration committee now, and it's really, really challenging core models in the organisation, like what's the maximum salary we'll pay? Is our salary policy of we'll pay the median in the sector? If we want to be really brilliant at digital, is that possible under the sort of current way that we run the charity? So once you get to a fairly advanced state, or it starts to ask really serious organizational questions about who you are and what you do, and that kind of brings us back round to structure, change, target operating model all over again. Because at ASMA UK, they're halving the number of head of people in the fundraising department, but going a bit more senior, and that's sort of come out of that whole journey.
That's fascinating. So many great examples there. Thank you, Jim. Before we dive into some questions from our participants, just one really brief final question for me, if you'd be able to sort of just answer this fairly briefly. That would be brilliant. We've got some questions coming up. What's the one thing which you wish you had learned earlier in your career about the pain of organisational change that I'm sure we've all experienced? What's the one thing you wish you'd learned earlier on?
It's a good question, and I was just trying to work out if I was going to go for this, because it's sort of counterintuitive, but probably a little bit more empathy and patience, because I'm a naturally quite impatient person, and it almost speaks back to that example with the person that wouldn't move desk. Like, what I didn't tell you as I told that story about how I handled it wonderfully and convinced them, I spent most of that 3 weeks absolutely infuriated, and I think that you want to create urgency, and you need to create the change, and you want that to have pace to it, but you have to be able to vary your style. So maybe actually what my ability to vary my style more is perhaps what would be the one thing that I would wanted to have been better at a few years ago.
The hallmark organisation. through this kind of change. Jim, thank you so much. I am delighted to open the floor now to our participants. I'm sure there'll be lots of them that have questions for Jim, and my colleague Dave is going to help me collate some of those questions and share them with you, Jim, if that's okay.
Yeah.
If you have a question, please do type it into the box in front of you, and then we can share them with Jim and see what he says.
So we've got one question here, Zoe, about Jim, any tips for smaller organisations that perhaps lack some of the resources available to large organisations?
Yeah, I think seek out. So if you're a small organisation, you've got a load of awesome advantages. You've got some challenges too. But some of the advantages are that that you probably don't have complex organisational politics and lots of legacy tech hanging around. And so what I would say is a top tip for me would be to identify the things that you need most help with and look if there's a system by which you can get mentors or some people that support your organization that have some of the skills that you really need some support with. So I sit on the Communications Council for a charity called Create, that's not a particularly large charity. That just operates as something where as a sounding board, really. So it meets every 2 months. It's a 2-hour meeting, and they have a list of things they need a bit of help with or some ideas for, and that happens at that.
Brilliant, thank you. All the questions are coming in now. Excellent. So I'm going to start with a question from Claudia. If I'm saying that right, an excellent question here. It would be helpful to have a clearer distinction between organisational change as a whole and digital. I see digital as a subset of organisational change, so not see it as a separate strategy. What's your view on that, Jim?
So I think really there's only organisational change. So I probably would be my view. So I think within so I guess I sort of agree, because organizational change for a really good reason is the goal, and sometimes that might involve implementing change that relates to technology or using the working methods that are most associated with digital. But though, you know, that over time, that's something that's changing, because those working methods are becoming more prevalent all over the place. I think having a separate digital strategy or a separate digital vision is a means to an end. So if that helps create focus for people to coalesce around a thing, then use it. I think some level of digital vision and roadmap is probably what we're now doing most commonly, but not so much digital strategies, inverted commas. There's an organizational strategy, and below that there's a roadmap of the things we want to achieve over the next 5 years digitally is quite common. But you could obviously make that roadmap service centric, for example. So lots more organizations moving to a more service design way of working, where they make blueprints of how the things they want to deliver work for both their internal teams and their processes and tools, and for the customer experience. So I think we will probably get more service centric over the next couple of years generally.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. And yeah, I see the two things as one and the same. I think absolutely right on that. Quite a few questions have come in now. I'm going to take them in the order they were asked. So thank you to everyone who's shared those questions. We've got a question from Philip here. When you talk about digital transformation, what are the most popular tools you see organisations implement?
Yeah, so I don't know if this is looking at sort of people and cultural tools or technical tools. So, I mean, most commonly for people type interaction tools, we've sort of helping people use variations of agile ways of working is what we see a lot of people trying to do. But normally keeping some of their older sort of project management and methodologies in the mix for certain types of project. We see people using maturity models to sort of measure where they are today and where they want to get to doing sort of selection processes for capability, maybe building capability models which can apply to technology or to people. Then I think if you it's good to be able to do almost like a values maturity model. One of the challenges I see sometimes in the charity sector is that values are amazing at focusing your mind on the end beneficiary, but they're not very good for working to if you work inside an organization. So if I look at Manifesto, our values are excellence, innovation, change, and they're kind of quite easy to describe how you should, and collaboration actually they're quite easy to describe how you should work against those. But if you look at someone like Christian Aid, for example, one of their values is justice, and that's a really great value, but it doesn't really tell you how to work on a day-to-day basis, or certainly not simply. And different people could come up with a different answer, and that doesn't mean it's not a great value for them, but it does mean that it's not very instructive to teams within the organization. Technical tools, I guess we see a lot of people moving away from specific and bespoke tools. So if you look at a lot of organizations end up doing CRM replacements, for example. We see people moving away from tools like Razor's Edge or Care Contacts to sort of Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics. So that sort of more sort of generic level. On the website front, we do lots of implementations of tools like Drupal, WordPress, Sitefinity, like that. Those all vary, and that's because we use a model when we do that to work out what would work best in the organization. And that's about what your existing team and technology is and what you're most likely to adopt and be successful with. So it's on a workflow, Jira remains very popular, Slack for collaboration. But there's lots of rules in lots of organizations that stop people having things like Slack, which I think is a real shame because the older fashioned equivalents are not nearly as good. But the ability to change your tools regularly is probably a reality of this era.
Yes, absolutely, and keeping an eye on what's out there and what's the right fit as you move through the different stages of organisation. Brilliant. So some more questions. I think we've got time for a couple more before we wrap up. So great question here from Dennis Byrne. He says it's fantastic. So kudos to you, Jim. He also asks, what financial implications should we consider in developing a digital strategy?
Well, I suppose you could. There's perhaps almost reverse engineering that question. So I suppose what's your financial picture? What's the financial situation you're in? Which could be, we've got quite a lot of cash now, but our income is declining, is one financial situation. We've got absolutely no cash now and we're tiny is a completely different context for that question. So I think broadly looking at your sort of situation and what you can do, and if the question is how should you look at that for developing a digital strategy, well, you could go anywhere from it costing nothing to getting people to work with you to spend absolute fortunes on it. So I think, if I look at the fastest that we've recently done a digital vision and roadmap for someone, we got the right people in the room for 3 days in an organization, and we built the whole core of that whole vision and roadmap in 3 days with an organization. So I'd almost say slightly separately to the money, it's about the needs, the priorities, and your capability and how much support you want. If someone wants to follow up with me with a sort of more specific situation, then I realise that was a bit of a woolly answer, wasn't it? Sorry about that.
No, I mean, it's a big question, isn't it? And it depends very much where your organisation is at. And if I'm honest as well myself, I mean, I think that these projects are notoriously hard to cost, aren't they, going into them? Because I mean, that's the whole point of having that discovery phase at the start. You don't know what products and services and what resources you're going to need when you get to that second phase of actually developing and finalising the roadmap. So it's put you on the spot there.
And I'm happy to say, like we do loads of them that cost around 50 grand. So and they tend to go either side of that. But I don't know if that's the sort of really direct answer that someone wanted. And they take about 8 weeks normally, and about 4 people work on different aspects of them. So, yeah.
Sure. Brilliant. Dennis, I hope that gives you a bit of a steer. If not, please do follow up with Jim. I'm sure we'd be happy to dig into a bit more detail on that. We've got a final question from Lauren. It's a really good question.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for driving change with a challenging trustee board?
So I'm going to assume that Lauren is a part of the executive of the charity, so works at the charity, and then there's a board that she hopefully has some form of relationship with. What I would do is, I'm on the other side of this, where I'm on the board at ASME UK. I think it's starting to get to the nub of why they're challenging, because let's say there are 8 people on this trustee group. Probably they're at different and varying levels of challenging, and there might be some key people that are noisy. And so I would say spend some time with them and work out what's motivating them, which might be a bit painful to do, but hopefully. One of my bosses at Cancer Research was incredibly good at this idea of socializing things. So before he ever went into a room where he needed to present a paper or something, everyone would have already known and had their chance to feed back a little bit. So when it got presented, it would always get approved because everybody felt like it was their idea. And so that would be my best tip, really, would be to like have it involves a bit of running around, but if people feel like they're part of what you're trying to achieve, then they're much more likely to agree with it.
So the shoe leather and spending that eyeball time with people. Yeah, absolutely. We've got time for one final question, if that's okay. So another question from Philip. What do you think are the most important skills to focus on developing when recruiting digital roles?
Yeah, I think let's assume that you're sort of focused on ongoing capability. Then I think you want to see someone that has that has some strategic capability, but I think over all else, you want people that are good at learning and good at self-finding, desk research, and finding out the answer to questions that they'd previously not considered.
Yeah, absolutely. That curiosity, isn't it? This has been brilliant. Thank you so much, Jim. I've just had a very nice message from Rachel. Actually, she's sorry she's got to dash off, but it was really useful, and I can see some more messages like that are coming in. So thank you so much for giving us this brilliant overview of these key elements of organisation change, some of the building blocks in that, so the skills, trustee boards, costing, challenging though that is, and helping us think through all of these issues. So we're really grateful to you for giving up your time today and sharing your insights, especially with the jet lag as well. So thank you so much for that. We hope you'll have a coffee on us to say thank you for bringing so much energy today, so many great ideas. And thank you to all of our participants as well for all their questions. And we hope that you'll join us for our next webinar, which is on Monday with Mandy Johnson, the legendary Mandy Johnson, who'll be talking about